Hey YouTube, this is Mike, also known as the Wizard of Odds, with yet another slot machine deconstruction video. This one is on the game Price Check. The game is made by IGT and probably dates back to the early 2000s. And unlike my other videos where I did an exact replication of the video, in this one I am not going to claim that I know exactly the real stripping and the possible prizes in the bonus round, but I'm going to use a combination of just observation from playing this game and industry norms to put together an analysis of how I think the game is designed. And I'm going to show you this in an effort to both teach you something about slot machine design as well as how to use Excel to analyze a slot machine. So that said, let's get our hands dirty with the math. Before I get into the math, let me show you some of the rule screens. This screen here is the first of three screens on the line page, which we will analyze first. This is a simple game where one credit buys one pay line, and the player may bet anything from 1 to 20 pay lines. And all wins are left aligned. So the highest paying symbol is the wild symbol, which can substitute for any line pay. And this screen is pretty self-explanatory. It shows what you win if you get 5, 4, or 3, or 2, in some cases, these symbols here, the wild, the chainsaw, the flashlight, and the vacuum cleaner. And here is the next set of symbols and what they pay. And finally, the last two lowest paying symbols. And this again reminds us that the wild can substitute for any of these symbols. So we are in Excel right now, and off camera I did some research studying how often I saw each symbol on each reel. And so between that and industry norms, I created what in my estimation is the number of times you see each symbol on each reel. And I don't claim this is exactly right. It is just my best estimate. And that's what you're looking at right here. So I design a lot of slot machines, just hundreds and hundreds of them. And one spreadsheet that I made that has come in handy with a lot of them is this one. And so I wrote a macro that I'm not going to get into, but I click this button here and it reads this table of information here as well as the symbol names, and it created randomized reel strips for me, which you see right here. So I'm going to copy them and put them in another spreadsheet that is mostly blank right here. So I'm going to paste them right here. So these are my reel strips. You can see that they are different lengths. For example, reel 1 goes from position 0 to 43 for a total of 44 stops. And as I've said in other videos, the way slot machines basically work is for each reel, the slot machine will pick a random number and then map it to a position on the reel strips. For example, let's say that it picks the number 7 for reel 1. Then it would put the screwdriver symbol on the top position or the top row, and then the wrench, and then the flashlight. And it's that simple. It's the way slot machines worked way back in the late 1800s, except for then it was mechanical springs and things like that that randomized where the reels stop. Now it's all done by random numbers. So here are my reel strips, and we're going to do the most important part first, calculating the return from the line pays. To save some time, I put in the pay table right here, and you can check that against the screenshots that I showed you earlier in this video. And so I created the table here for how often you see each symbol on each reel. So to count them, I'm going to use the countif function. So for that, for the first parameter, you put in the range that you're looking at, and I'll skip that for now. And then the second parameter is what you're looking for. So right now I'm working on how many wilds do you see in reel 1. So let's go back to that first parameter, and I'm going to put in the entirety of column B in the reel strips sheet. So that's telling me that the wild symbol appears twice on reel 1. And we can copy and paste that down and get a count of every symbol on every reel. So let's take the total to make sure it's right. And that looks right to me. So we are ready to start to count the number of ways the player might achieve any of these wins in the pay table. So I took the liberty of creating this table here to put in how many ways each possible win occurs. So let's start with 5 wilds. That's really quite easy. That's going to be the product of the number of ways you can get a wild on all 5 reels. In other words, 2 times 2 times 2 times 3 times 3. So there are 72 ways the player might get 5 wilds. So how about 5 chainsaws? Well, in reel 1, the player can get a wild or a chainsaw. And I'm going to put $1 in front of this 18 for reasons that I will explain later. And then he needs to get a wild or a chainsaw on reel 2, which is in column C, reel 3, which is in column D, reel 4, which is in column E, and reel 5, which is in column F. So if we stopped now, that we would have 2,500 combinations of a way to get a wild or a chainsaw in all 5 reels. But some of those ways already pay more as something else. So let's go back to the pay table here. And we can see that 5 wilds pays 10,000. So we need to subtract out getting 5 wilds from that because the player only gets paid for one reason, whatever pays the most. Also, if the player got, say, wild, 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 wild chainsaw, he would get paid more, 1,000 for the 4 wilds, than 500 for 5 chainsaws. So we need to subtract out that as well. So let's go back to this formula here. And let's subtract the number of ways the player can get wilds on reels 1, 2, 3, and 4 times the number of ways he could get a wild or a chainsaw on reel 5. So that brings it down to 2,380. And let's go back to our pay table here. We can use the same logic for all the other 5 in a rows because for all of them, 4 or 5 wilds pays more, but 3 wilds always pays less. So let's go back to this formula here, and I'm going to make sure that there are dollars in front of any 18, which represents the number of wild symbols, so we don't want that to change. And then we can copy and paste this down. So there we go. These numbers look right to me. These are the combinations of achieving, and let's put a comma in those numbers to make them look better, any 5 in a row win. Next, let's work on the 4 in a row combinations. So we'll start with 4 wilds. That's going to be pretty easy. It's going to be the number of ways the player can get a wild in reel 1 times reel 2 times reel 3 times reel 4 times the number of ways the player can get anything other than a wild on reel 5. So it comes to 936. So for four chainsaws, that's going to be the number of ways the player can get a wild or a chainsaw on reel 1 times the number of ways that can happen on reel 2, which is in column C, times the number of ways he can get either one on reel 3, which is in column D, times the number of ways he can get either one on reel 4, which is in column E, times, again, the number of ways the player can get anything other than a wild or a chainsaw on reel 5, which is going to be 42 minus 3 minus 2. So before we address any double counting problem, that would be 18,500. However, going back to the pay table, we see that if the player got wild, 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 wild in the first 4 reels, that would pay more as 4 wilds than 4 chainsaws. So let's go back to this formula. And from the first 4 columns, let's subtract the number of combinations of a wild on each one. So that brings it down to 17,612. So I'm going to copy and paste this formula down. So I'm going to put dollars in front of the 18s, 18 representing the number of wilds in each reel. So I don't want that to change. Nor do I want to change this row 30, which is the total number of symbols. So let's go back to our pay table. It's safe to copy and paste that down through the flashlight and the vacuum because those pay way more for 4 wilds than 4 flashlights or 4 vacuums. But we run into kind of a problem with 4 drills. The player gets paid the same, either 50 for 4 drills or 3 wilds. So I'm going to arbitrarily score that situation, say wild, wild, wild drill as 3 wilds. So it's going to be safe to copy and paste this formula here for 4 chainsaws through the flashlight and the vacuum. With 4 drills, things start to get a little tricky, but first let's find the number of combinations before we worry about the double counting problem. So the player can get a wild or a drill on reel 1 times the number of ways he can get a wild or a drill on reel 2 times the number of ways he can get a wild or a drill on reel 3 times the number of ways he can get a wild or a drill on reel 4 times the number of ways he can get anything other than a wild or a drill on reel 5, which is going to be 42 minus 3 minus 4. So that gives us 52,920. However, that is counting some situations that pay more as 3 or 4 wilds. So let's go back to our formula here. So from the first 2 columns, reels 1 and 2, I'm going to subtract out, no, let's do it this way. From reels 1, 2, and 3, let's subtract out the ways to get all wilds. So that is going to be the product of the number of wilds on reels 1 to 3. And that gives us 50,960, which looks right to me. So again, this is the number of ways the player can get a wild or a drill on reels 1 to 4 minus the number of ways that go wild, 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 and then a wild or a drill on reel 4, and then all that times the number of ways the player can get anything but a wild or drill on reel 5. So we are going to copy and paste that down. So let's put dollar symbols in front of all the 18s, so when I copy and paste that down, the 18s won't change. And we also don't want the 30s to change, representing the total number of symbols on real 5. So, and let me go back to the pay table to make sure it's safe to do that. Yep. So it's safe, so we can to copy and paste this down. And these numbers look right to me. Next, we're going to work on the number of combinations for 3 wilds. And this is the most complicated calculation in this whole video. So first let's count up just the raw wins before we worry about double counting. So that's going to be the number of ways to get wilds on reels 1, 2, and 3 times the number of ways to get anything other than a wild on reel 4, which is 42 minus 3, times the number of ways we can get anything on reel 5. So before correcting for the double counting problem, we're at 13,104. And I'm going to make a section down here called 3 wild double counts. So first let's count out the ways the player might get paid more for 4 of the same symbol. For example, if the player got wild, 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 chainsaw, he would get paid more for 4 chainsaws at 125 than 3 wilds. So, and that's going to also hold true for 4 flashlights and 4 vacuums. And we already said that if the player got 3 wilds and then a drill, we would count that as 3 wilds. So subtracting out the 4 in a row wins, that's going to be the number of ways the player can get a wild on reels 1, 2, and 3 times the number of ways he can get a chainsaw, a flashlight, or a vacuum on reel 4 times the number of ways he can get anything on reel 5. So that's 2688. However, what if the player got wild, 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 drill, drill? The player would get paid $250 for the 5 drills or $50 for the 3 wilds. So we need to subtract out combinations like what I just said, wild, 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 and then drill, drill. So let's go back down here. Let's make another thing for 5 in a row. So there's the number of the symbols where the player would get paid more for 5 of a kind than 3 wilds are the drill through the wrench. So I'm going to copy down the names of those symbols here. So now let's work here on subtracting out combinations that go like wild, 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 drill, drill. So that's going to be the number of ways to get wilds on reels 1, 2, and 3 times the number of ways to get a drill on reel 4 times a wild or a drill on reel 5. So we can go back to including the wilds on reel 5 because that drill on reel 4 would have blocked off the consecutive wilds. So that is looking like 224 for that situation. So let's put dollars in front of all the 18s. So when we copy and paste this down, it'll still work. So now let's go back up to here and then subtract all these situations where some other win pays more. And that gives us 8,544, which I hope you'll take my word for it, is correct based on other calculations I did off camera. Next, let's work on the number of combinations for 3 chainsaws. So that's going to be the number of ways the player can get a chainsaw, a wild or a chainsaw, excuse me, on reel 1, times the number of ways he can get a wild or a chainsaw on reel 2, times the number of ways he can get a wild or a chainsaw on reel 3, times the number of ways he can get anything other than a wild or a chainsaw on reel 4, which is going to be 42 minus 3 minus 2, times the number of ways he can get anything on reel 5. So that is 155,400, but we need to subtract out some higher paying wins. For example, if the player got 3 wilds, that would pay more as 3 wilds than 3 chainsaws. So let's go back to our formula here. So for the first 3 reels, let's subtract the number of ways the player can get wilds on those 3 reels. And that brings us down to 142,968. And let's go back to our pay table to see how far it's safe to copy and paste that down. It looks like we can copy and paste that down through the screws. If the player got wild hand saw and then something else like a drill, that would pay the same for either 2 wilds or 3 hand saws. So I'm going to count that situation as 2 wilds. So let's go back here and put dollar symbols in front of all our 18s because we don't want to change the row for wilds, nor row 30 for the total number of symbols. And I believe it is safe to copy and paste that down through the screws. And that does look right to me. Next, let's do the combinations for 3 hand saws. So pay attention, this one is a little tricky. So for reel 1, the player can get a wild or a handsaw. So there's 2 plus 5 equals 7 ways that can happen, times the number of ways he can get a wild or a handsaw on reel 2. But at this point, let's subtract out the number of ways that he gets wilds on reels 1 and 2, because we're going to count that as getting paid for 2 wilds. So all this is for reels 1 and 2. For reel 3, the player must get, no, the player can get a wild or a handsaw. For reel 4, the player can get anything other than a wild and a handsaw, which is going to be 42 minus 3 minus 6. And for reel 5, the player can get anything, or 42. So that gives us 504,504 combinations for 3 handsaws. And now let's put dollars in front of all the 18s So when we copy and paste it down for the wrenches, the formula will be accurate, as well as the 30s for the total number of stops on the reel. And let's copy and paste that down. And I think we made a mistake somewhere. 18, 18, 18. Yeah, I forgot a $sign right here. So let's recopy. And there we go. It's the same number. And let's have a look at the number of stops. You can see that for all 5 reels, the number of stops for a handsaw is the same as the wrench. Therefore, the combinations should be the same. 1, 2, 3. Okay, next let's work on the combination for 2 wilds. And this is going to be another tricky one, so pay attention. So just the raw number, before we worry about double counting, is going to be the number of ways the player can get a wild on reel 1 and reel 2, times the number of ways he can get anything other than a wild, which is going to be 43 minus 2 on reel 3, times the number of ways he can get anything on reels 4 and 5. So that's 289, 296. But I know that's way more than should be due to double counting. So now let's create another separate section for 2 wild double counts. So what about ways the player might get 3 in a row? Let's go back to the pay table. If the player got wild, 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 and then a chainsaw through screws, the player would get paid more for 3 of those symbols than he would for the 2 wilds. So let's go back down here. So it's going to be the number of ways the player can get a wild on reel 1 times a wild on reel 2 times the number of ways the player gets a chainsaw through screws on reel 3 times the number of ways he can get anything at all on reel 4 and reel 5. So let's see where we're at just by subtracting out those situations. That brings it down to 105,000 and something. But that's still too high because we need to subtract out some 4 in a row wins. For example, if the player got wild, wild, handsaw, handsaw, he would get paid more for the 4 handsaws than he would for the 2 wilds. So let's copy and paste these symbol names, the handsaw and the wrench. So let's calculate the number of ways the player can get a wild times a wild times a handsaw in reel 3, times the number of ways the player can get a wild or a handsaw on reel 4 times the number of ways you can get anything on reel 5. 7,560. And I'm going to put dollars in front of all those 18s. So when I copy it down to the wrenches, it should still be correct, and as well as the 30 for the total number of symbols. So let's go back up to here. And rather than subtracting out just B58, I'm also going to subtract out B60 and B61. And that gives us 90,720. So trust me, that number is right. Just one more situation to go. 2 chainsaws, which pays 3, the lowest pay in the whole game. So the player will get paid for 2 chainsaws if he gets a wild or a chainsaw in reel 1 times the number of ways he can get a wild or a chainsaw in reel 2 minus the number of ways both those reels are a wild, which would pay more as 2 wilds. So let's put parentheses around all that. And so we have 21 combinations, but that's just for reels 1 and 2. For reel 3, the player can get anything except, in fact, let's do it this way. The player can get anything from a flashlight through the Handyman. And for reel 4, he can get anything. And for reel 5, he can get anything. So the number of ways the player gets paid for 2 chainsaws is 1,444,716. So that number looks correct to me. All right, we are ready to calculate the return from line pays. So I'm going to add a couple of rows here. And I'm going to calculate the total combinations. So that's going to be just the number of, or the product of the number of stops on all 5 reels. So there's 143 million some odd possible ways that the reels could stop in this game. So I'm going to copy and paste this content for combinations. Let's change the word combinations to probability. And let's blank out all this. So the probability of any given win is going to be the number of ways that win can happen, which we already calculated, divided by the total number of combinations. So I'm going to put dollars in the B46 so that when I copy and paste that, it won't change. And I'm going to copy and paste this through the whole table. And let's change these cells to decimals. And here we go, number 3, 4, 5, 6. There we go. Those are the probabilities of getting any given win. And let's add those up. So this is telling us, for example, the probability of getting any 5 in a row win on any given pay line is 0.000902. So let's copy and paste that down. And now let's calculate the probabilities for any given symbol. And copy and paste that down. So the cell right here, F78, 0.036617, shows us that for any given pay line, the probability of getting a line pay win on that is 3.66%. And now let's copy and paste this whole table, but change the label to the return. Let's get rid of the body. So the return is going to be simply the probability times what it pays up here in the pay table. And we can copy and paste that down. And voila. This shows us in cell F93 that line pays contribute 62.83% of the return. So for every dollar the player bets, he can expect to get back 62.83 cents in the form of line pays. So next we are going to talk about the bonuses. Next, let's move on to the price check bonus. It is triggered by getting the price check symbol on reels 1, 3, and 5. It does not appear on reels 2 and 4, and it can be in any position. And all prizes are relative to the total amount bet. The probability of hitting the bonus is not dependent on how many lines that you play. So let's show you an example of it. So here you can see that I did get the price check symbol on all 3 reels, and then it prompts you to pick one of those price check symbols. I picked the one on reel 3, and it awarded me 5 picks. In all the times that I have played this bonus, it is always 3, 4, and 5. And so let's move on. So then you go to this hardware store, and there are 12 things that you can buy, as you can see. And each one will either reveal a prize or a multiplier. So let's move on.
Let's see what we can get for you. Gotta love the cost.
So here I picked the sander, and let's see what it comes up as. Okay, sometimes it doesn't immediately scan. So then the cashier will call for a price check. And mathematically, this doesn't make any difference. You will hear a bunch of people calling out prices, but it's always the last one that's the highest.
More than that, that's an incredible price.
Okay, so the highest one was 300, which was, keep in mind I bet 20. So all of the wins are going to be multiples of 20. In that case, it was 15 times my bet, and the price checks do tend to lead to bigger prizes. So let's move on.
Hey, this is a bright
There's the
idea.
light bulbs that pay 20 or 1 times my bet, and then there was a circular saw. Oh, and that paid a 2x multiplier.
Right, Sawzilla.
No, a 3x multiplier. I guess he had to run it through multiple times.
This'll suck the color out.
And here comes the vacuum cleaner that paid 2 times my bet, and then
You must have some nice
a tool chest. So then it's going to show me like a receipt showing me everything that I won. And so you can, so again, I got 5 picks, and so the total of the everything other than the multiplier, let's see, that would be 380, and then you multiply that by 3 for the multiplier, and that awards a bonus of 1,140. But let's keep in mind that I bet 20, so that bonus was 57 times my bet, which was a good one, a bit better than average. And also notice at the end of the bonus, it shows what was behind all 12 different symbols, which I totally respect IGT, the makers of this game, for doing so. And when you don't see this, it probably means that the bonus was gaffed and you really had no free will. So with that said, I think we're ready to go back to Excel and analyze this thing. 1, 2, 3. Before I go back to Excel, let me show you the page of the rules that shows the rules for the price check bonus. Feel free to pause the video and read it for yourself. And let me get rid of that. So here we are back in Excel. So let's make a new tab, and let's call it the price. Let's just call it price check for the price check bonus. So first let's calculate the probability of triggering the bonus. So the probability of triggering it on any one pay line is, and let's go to the line pays sheet. It's going to be the number of ways you can get the price check symbol on reel 1 times the number of ways you can get it on reel 3 times the number of ways you can get it on reel 5. But let's divide that by the number of total reel stops on reel 1 times the number of stops on reel 3 times the number of stops on reel 5. Now, I wish to emphasize that the price check symbols can appear anywhere on these reels. And there are 3 visible rows per reel, so these symbols can appear in one of 3 positions on reel 1, 3, and 5. So we need to multiply this probability that I've already done by 3 to the 3rd power, which is 27. So the probability of triggering the bonus is 0.006. And for those who prefer it stated another way, that's about 1 in 163.5. And there are 2 bonuses in this game, so this strikes me as a reasonable figure. And it's also consistent with how often I saw this bonus just playing. So next let's look at the prizes. So the rule screen said that the prizes could range from 1 to 24. So let's put all the low prizes, 1, 2, 3, and 5, and let's put in a 7, an 8, a 10, a 15, and a 24. Now I never saw a 24 prize, but the rules said that it's possible. And let's give each one of these a weighting. And based on work that I did off camera, I find these weights here to be reasonable. So 17 for 1, 11 for 2, 9 for 3, 8 for 5, 5 for 7, 6 for 8, 6 for 10, 3 for 15, and 1 for 24. And, you know, I emphasize I make no claims that these are exactly right. It's just my best guess based on playing it several times and industry norms. So the way this might work is the game picks a random number, random integer from 1 to 66, and will map it to one of the prizes according to that number. For example, if it's 1 to 17, it gets mapped to a prize of 1. If it's the next 11 numbers, it gets mapped to a prize of 2, and so on. So what is the average prize? Well, let's figure that out. The sum of all 66 prizes can be found by using the sum product function, or the dot product for those people who prefer mathematical terminology. So you take the range of the prizes times the range of the weights, and that gives you 318, the sum of all the prizes. But we need to divide that by the total number of prizes of 66, and that gives us an average prize of about 4.82. And by the way, these are the base prizes. Everything gets multiplied by the total amount that you bet. Okay, so what about the number of picks? That can be 3, 4, or 5. In my experience, it seemed to me, no, in fact, I don't even need to say that. You could see that in the example, the player was prompted to pick one of the 3 symbols, and every single time I played it, there was a 3, 4, and a 5, implying that they were all equally likely. Next, let's talk about the multipliers. So the rule screen said that they could range from 2 to 5. So let's assume they can be anything from 2 to 5, but in every time I played through this bonus, it was always a 2 or a 3. So I'm going to assign multipliers of 4 and 5 just a weighting of 1, and the multipliers of 2 and 3 a weighting of 10 each. In other words, the chances of getting a 2 or a 3 are 20 out of 22. So the average multiplier is we can find by using the sum product function again. So using the same calculation as for the average price, we get an average multiplier of 2.68. So next, let's go back up here. So here's the number of picks. And now let's calculate the average number of wins. Before we do that, let's calculate the probability of getting a multiplier. So if there's 3 picks, the player has a 3 in 12 chance of finding the multiplier. And likewise, if he gets 4 picks, he has a 4 in 12, and 5, he has a 5 in 12 chance of finding it. So, what is the average total win? Well, let's do it for 3 picks first. There is a 25% chance the player finds a multiplier. If he does, he's going to get that multiplier of this figure right here in cell B37 times the average prize times 2. And we only multiply by 2 because one of his 3 picks was the multiplier itself. So I'm going to do the number of picks minus 1. Now I'm going to add to that the probability of not getting a multiplier, which is going to be 1 minus the value in cell C25, and then multiply by the number of picks without subtracting anything, and then multiply by the average prize. So this is telling me that the average win, if the player gets 3 picks, is about 17.3. And now I'm going to put dollar symbols in front of all the 22s. So when I copy and paste this down, the average prize will remain the same. And also the 37s for the average multiplier. And C25, that can change. A25 can change. Yeah. So let's copy and paste this down. So this is showing us if the player gets 4 picks, his average prize is going to be about 25.8 and 35.645 picks. No, let's call this, so now let's calculate the expected win for any given number of picks. So that's going to be the probability of getting that number of picks times the average win. And then let's take the sum of column E, and that tells us the average bonus win is 26.22, which is very much consistent with industry norms. So let's put that again up here. So the bonus return is simply the probability of triggering the bonus times the average win if you do. So this is telling me that the return from the price check bonus is 16.0%. Next, let's look at the final piece of this game, the Handyman bonus. And that is triggered by getting 3 to 5 handy men anywhere scattered on the screen. And you can see in this example I got them on reels 2, 4, and 5. So let's see what happens. So you are prompted to pick one, and it just reveals a prize. It's really that simple. And in this example, I bet 20 credits, and prizes much like the price check bonus are always relative to the total amount that you bet. So had I picked the icon on reel 2, I would have won 8 times my bet, reel 4 9 times, and reel 5 15 times. And let me next show you the rule screen. This page of the rule screens shows the rules for the Handyman bonus. It says that if you get 3 or more Handyman icons anywhere scattered on the reels, then you will get to play the bonus. If you get 3, you get 1 pick, 4, you get 2, and 5, you get 3. And it also shows you the shape of the pay lines. Not that that has anything to do with this bonus, but that is more applicable to the line pays. I will add that it doesn't make any difference how the lines are drawn in most slot machines, including this one. So let's minimize that, and that brings me back to Excel. And first let's figure out the probability of triggering the bonus. So each reel can either have a Handyman symbol or not. So there are 2 to the 5th power, or 32 different ways you can get or not get a Handyman on each reel. So let's do a little binary arithmetic here. So with this index number, I'm going to generate either a 0 or a 1 for each reel. And so right now I'm doing it for reel 2. So I'm going to take that index number, divide it by 2, drop the remainder, and then take it to the modulo of 2. In other words, divide it by 2 and take the remainder. And I'm going to copy and paste this formula for the other, for reels 1 to 3. For reel 3, I'm going to divide by 4. For reel 2, I'm going to divide by 8. And for reel 1, I'm going to divide by 16. So that results in a 0 for all 5 reels for an index value of 0. But watch what happens when I copy and paste this down. We get a sequence of zeros and ones that cover all 32 possible ways you can get a 0 or 1 on each reel. So this, by the way, are the numbers 0 to 31 written in binary or base 2 form. So next let's count up the number of Handyman symbols for all 32 possibilities. So it's going to give us numbers ranging from 0 to 5. And let's put up here the probability of getting a Handyman symbol. So that's going to be 3 times the number of Handymen on any given reel divided by the total number of stops. Why do I multiply by 3, you might ask? It's because there are 3 rows visible on the screen. So the Handyman could be in any one of those 3. So here we see the probability of getting a Handyman on each reel. So the probability of any given situation is if there is a Handyman, for example, on reel 1, then we take the probability of getting that Handyman, and if there's not, then we take 1 minus the probability of finding a Handyman or the probability of not finding a Handyman. And then let's put dollars in front of these 17s. So no, this time we're going to put them in front of the B's. No, I'm wrong. we do put them in front of the 17s. So I'm going to copy and paste that for reel 2. So now we're going to be looking at cell C20, and we're going to be looking at C17 for the probability of finding a handyman on reel 2. And I do the same thing for reel 3, and then reel 4, we look at column E, and for reel 5, we look at column F. So this is telling me the probability of getting 0 handymen anywhere on the screen is about 55%. So let's copy and paste that down to the other 31 possibilities. And then let's take the total to make sure we did it right. So it's giving us a probability of 1. So this is showing us the probability of any given sequence of getting handymen and not handymen on all 5 reels. So the only totals that matter are 5, 4, and 3. So let's find out, let's start with 3. So the probability of finding 3 handy men is, we're going to use the SUMIF function. So first we put in the range that we're looking at for the number of handy men, which is going to be in column G here, this range. Then we put what we're looking for, which is going to be this 3 here in cell A12. And then we look at what we are adding if we find that handyman, represented in column H. So this is telling me the probability of finding exactly 3 handy men is about 1.04%. And now I'm going to put dollar symbols in front of this range of 20 to 51 because I don't want that to change when I copy and paste this. So here I am copying and pasting it. And so this is also telling me the probability of getting 4 and 5 handy men. And let's put everything in a decimal format because I know a lot of people just hate scientific notation. I personally love it, but I'm not everybody. So this is telling me the probability of triggering the handyman bonus is about 1.1%. Okay, next let's talk about what the prizes might be. Let's move this up here. And as the example that I showed you showed, when I got 3 handymen, I just picked 1 prize out of 3. And it did show the prizes that I didn't pick, so I assume that I do have free will. So, and in playing this game to do research for this video, I never saw the same prize twice in the same bonus. It was always 3 different numbers, and I never triggered it with 4 or 5 handy men. So I tend to think that what's going on, or the way I would do it if I were tasked with making this game, is there's different baskets of prizes and the game randomly picks 1 from each basket for each prize. For example, I'll say prize 1 might have prizes of 5, 6, and 8. And I'm going to shift this over 1 column. And prize 2 might have prizes of 7, 9, and 10. And I might remind you these are the base prizes. The actual prizes get multiplied by the total amount the player bet. So prize 3, that might be 11, 12, and 15. And let's create an average here. So, if the player triggers this bonus with 3 handy men, I allege that for one of the prizes, it's picking one at random and equally likely between 5, 6, and 8. Another one is going to be 7, 9, or 10, and another is going to be 11, 12, and 15. And by the way, these are all prizes that I saw quite a few times. So let's make another column here for picks. As I believe I showed you in the rule screen, if the player triggers it with 5 handy men, he gets 3 picks, 4 he gets 2, and 3 he gets 1. So the average prize, if the player triggers it with 3, is going to be the average of these 3 averages. There you go, about 9.2. So what might happen if the player triggers it with 4? So let me show you the probabilities of triggering this bonus. The probability is a very attainable, about 1 in 96 of triggering it with 3 handy men, and it goes all the way up to 1,653 for triggering it with 4, and 1 in about 74,000 with triggering it with 5. So it's really difficult to trigger it with 4 or 5. So the game can afford to be generous to the player if he triggers it with 4 or 5 because it's so unlikely. So what I think might happen, and also in the rule screen, it said that the maximum prize was 150. So I want to squeeze 150 in here somewhere. So what I think might happen is the prize for 4, or shall we say this 4th prize, might be bigger. So I'm going to put in a 30, a 40, a 50, and an 80. So there's going to be, so if the player triggers it with 4, there's going to be one like big prize out there. And with 2 picks, the player will have a 50-50 chance of finding it. So the average prize, if there are 4 prizes to choose from, goes all the way up to 19.4. And again, this is just, how I would design the game if I did it. In playing this game for this video, again, I never once hit it with 4 or 5. And for 5, I imagine there could be a nice big bonus or a big prize. So I'm going to put in just 2 possible prizes of 100 and 150. So that obviously has an average of 125. So there the average goes all the way up to about 40.5. So the contribution to the return is the probability of triggering the bonus with any given number of handy men, the number of picks, and the average prize. So let's add that up. So the way I did this, I allege that the contribution to the return from this bonus is about 12.14%. So let's wrap this up. Let's create another sheet. We'll call it summary. And so there's 3 ways to win this game. We will call these the features. One of them is the line pays. One of them is the price check bonus. And one of them is the handyman bonus. So the return from the line pays, as we calculated earlier, is about 62.8%. From the price check bonus, it's about 16.0%. And from the Handyman bonus, it's about 12%. So let's add that up. And we get 91%. That is a believable return. It's probably a little above average for Las Vegas. It's the kind of return you might see at one of the locals casinos. And yeah, that's it. The end. I hope you enjoyed the video and learned something. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up. And I invite you to watch some of my other videos on slot machine analysis where I've analyzed some other slot machines. And yeah, let me shut my mouth and hope you enjoy the rest of your day. Bye.